Hello again. This is James Byrne. I'm continuing addressing another issue of this podcast concerning polygamy that is not of God. Joseph Smith was a monogamist. Today is a short episode, and I wanted to address a very important testimony, a witness that is very valuable to give in this podcast, which is trying to get to truth and show references that Joseph Smith was not involved at all, was completely against it and condemned polygamy. So let me first share my screen. And here we are. Uh, one of the witnesses today I want to speak about is James Whitehead, and he was the secretary for Joseph Smith. James Whitehead would have seen him every day, and his farm was literally very close to where the prophet Joseph actually lived himself. Now, we have a reference here, which is from a book in this that gives this reference about James Whitehead's testimony. Because if you remember again, the Temple Lot trial, James Whitehead was a witness at that. So we have a recorded court testimony. And here he is asked about the um, what his relation with Joseph Smith, what he saw, what he knew, and he answered a series of these questions. Um, and I'll just take directly from his dialogue at the court case. So James Whitehead says, when I lived at Nauvoo, I resided maybe 300 yards from where the Prophet Joseph's house was. I saw him there frequently, perhaps not every day, but almost every day that he was in Nauvoo. I was there in his office as his private secretary at the time he was killed. I was in his office on that day and was keeping the books at that time. Joseph Smith had one wife, and her name was Emma. I do not know of any other woman who claimed to be the prophet, to be the wife of the prophet there at Nauvoo, nor at any other place. I do not know of any other wife he had other than Emma at any time or place. I never heard of such a thing during his lifetime. I do not know of any woman who claimed to be his wife or plural wife. I never saw any of them. I do not know anything about that. I never heard anybody claim, except Emma Smith, that she was the wife of Joseph Smith. There was never any woman who came to me or Joseph Smith in my presence during the time of my employment as his private secretary for money, claiming that she was the wife of Joseph Smith, except his wife Emma. There was no entry of that kind ever made on the books of money paid by me or by him to any woman claiming to be his wife, except Emma. So say in the lawyers at that court case goes on to cross-examine James Whitehead. The book exhibited marked Exhibit A, entitled Doctrine and Covenants, published in Utah by the Utah Church, Salt Lake City, is the book that contains a revelation on polygamy, I believe. I have read page 464. I've read what it is in that book before, but I never heard of it or saw it anywhere but in that but in there. I knew nothing about that at all until I saw it in that book. James Whitehead then goes on to say, I can swear positively that it's not the same as the Whitney revelation. Now, James Whitehead is describing Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, and he's just saying it's positively not the same as a Whitney revelation, which was a revelation that was written on marriage, that was handed to me, that I read at the winter quarters, because that revelation that Whitney had no such words in it to my knowledge, that was put into it by Brigham Young or some of his clique, or it was not in there at the time that Whitney showed it to me. Of that I am positive. I did not say that there was enough of the Whitney revelation in this revelation in the Utah Book of Doctrine and Covenants for me to identify it. I did not say any such thing. There was nothing of the sort in it. I said they had taken parts of that revelation and added to it in such a way as to change meaning, the meaning entirely. I did not say that was the same revelation, and I do not say now that it is or that it is not. But if there is any part of the revelation that Whitney showed me in this, it has been so mutated and changed around as to entirely change its meaning from what it was. So let me summarize this Whitney revelation that Joseph Smith could have given or written, which was a short revelation. And when then Brigham Young got his hands on it, added to it, and corrupted the meaning of it to the point that it was no longer the original revelation that Joseph had given. Obviously, Brigham Young given it a bias of polygamy. The marriage would have been written on the subject of marriage. I say, this is James Whitehead saying, I say that I could read over 2 or 3 pages of the manuscripts 40 years ago and now tell the substance that was in it, for it was something that particular impressed itself on my memory and was something that that left a very strong impression on my mind, for that was the first time I had seen that revelation on sealing, and the only time I saw it, and I was interested in it to a great extent. I observed it closely, and I remember about what the doctrine was that it taught, and I know that this doctrine of polygamy was not taught in it there clearly. I swear positively that that revelation that Whitney showed me was not the same as this published in this book, and they were not the same at all. I can tell from my memory that there are principles taught in the book Exhibit A, the alleged revelation, that were not taught in the revelation that Whitney had. I know that of my own knowledge, and I have given the reasons why I would be likely to remember this revelation and what was in it that Whitney showed me. And I do remember it is it in substance. And I know that the principles that were taught in the one that Whitney showed me are not the ones in this book, Exhibit A. And if it is the same revelation, it has been added to and changed. So there is not the same meaning in it that there that was in the original. The one that Whitney showed me did not teach any such stuff as this here in Exhibit A, or any like stuff. So, full testimony of James Whitehead, I have the at the Temple Lot case of 1891. I have two links there, and I just want to point out here that in those documents, which has the whole testimony, um, there's something of great note to point out because, see, here we have it saying that William Clayton was Smith's private secretary in some parts. Yeah, William Clayton was Joseph Smith's private secretary in some parts of the business. He attended the outside business and did whatever he was directed to do. William Clayton was there in the office before I was. So William Clayton was in that private secretary job before James Whitehead, but was not there at the time, not there all the time after I came. He was removed from his position as private secretary by Joseph Smith and the committee, the Temple Committee, about the time I was appointed because there was something took place in connection with Leighton's work that gave dissatisfaction. There was some money disappeared and he was blamed for it. And for that reason, he was removed from the office, from that office that occurred in 1843 in the beginning of the year. Uh, After he was removed as private secretary or clerk in this office, he did outside work looking at the property of the church outside. So the the key note I'd like to point out here with are two things of great note here to summarize. J James Whitehead, the private secretary of Joseph Smith, never saw any other wife, never heard of any other wife, never there was nothing mentioned or in any of Joseph Smith's sermons or teachings regarding plurality of wives. That's the first thing. The second thing is William Clayton, at the time that Doctrine and Covenants section 132 was not the private secretary of Joseph Smith. It was James Whitehead from the beginning of 1843 up to Joseph's death. And what did we have in July of 1843? We had the purported alleged revelation of section 132, which was the polygamy scripture and doctrine that it was received July of 1843. But sure, William Clayton was no longer the private secretary to write any of these revelations or anything for Joseph Smith. So it is a no a point that is overlooked that William Clayton no longer the private secretary who would have written the revelation if he was the, which we are led to believe that William Clayton did write that, but it can't be the case. He was removed from the office of early in 1843, and it would have been James Whitehead who would have written and recorded that revelation, the section 132, if it was indeed received. But James Whitehead's name is not written, or does he record anything to do with it? So it's further evidence there regarding um, Joseph Smith not being involved in it, and the narrative that um, polygamy started or was proposed and taught by Joseph Smith is wrong. See, here's a more, this is the uncorrelatedmormonism.com, where all the questions asked to James Whitehead was written there. You know, how how long, where did he live, what was his business in Arvu, um, you know, uh, who baptized you. So it goes through James Whitehead's testimony regarding it, and it's a testimony we can rely on because he had no motive but to tell the truth. And that's a short episode for today, and we'll speak again and in the future episodes. So bye for now.